The day Petra Lemaire got down on her knees in the middle of a Loblaws, not to pick something up, not because she slipped, but because a man twice her size decided she needed to be reminded of her place, was the day everything in her quiet, carefully held together life cracked open. She hadn't expected it. You never do. It was a Tuesday. She remembered that specifically, the way you remember useless details when something big happens. Tuesday, because she'd worked a 12-hour night shift at St. Michael's and was still in her scrubs when she stopped at the grocery store on her way home. Teal scrubs, a little wrinkled, her hair pulled back with a pen still stuck through it. She'd grabbed a basket. She just needed eggs, some bread, maybe Greek yogurt if it was on sale. The store was half empty at 9 in the morning. That particular quiet you only get on weekday mornings. A few retirees, a mom with a stroller, a guy in a suit on his phone by the deli. Petra moved through the produce section, squeezing avocados she had no intention of buying, just out of habit. She didn't notice the man until she was already in his way. Or rather, until he decided she was. His name, she'd learn later, was Gauthier. First name Luc, though he went by his last name the way men do when they want you to remember them. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, broad to the shoulders, wearing a quarter-zip sweater that cost more than Petra's rent. He had the face of a man who had never once in his adult life waited for anything. "You're blocking the aisle," he said. "Not excuse me. Not sorry, could I just, you're blocking the aisle." Like a statement of fact delivered to someone who worked for him. Petra looked up. She moved her basket. "Sorry." She went back to the avocados. "Those are the organic ones." He said it the way you'd correct a child reaching for something they shouldn't touch. Petra paused. "I know. You're handling them. You're bruising them." She set the avocado down carefully. She was tired. She'd had 4 hours of sleep in the last 36. She didn't want to fight. She never wanted to fight. "My apologies," she said, and she meant it the way she always meant it. Not because she was wrong, but because she understood that some people needed the apology more than they deserved it. But Gauthier wasn't finished. He stepped closer. Not close enough to be physically threatening. He was too practiced for that. But close enough that she had to look up at him. Close enough that the other shoppers nearby could see, could feel, the power being exercised. "You people from the hospital," he said, looking at her scrubs the way some people look at something they've tracked in on the bottom of their shoe. "You come in here at all hours, half asleep, touching everything, holding up the line. Have some consideration." Petra blinked. "You people." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about what she could say. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about the woman in bed 7 she'd held through a seizure at 3 in the morning, and the teenager in the ER who'd squeezed her hand and said, "Am I going to be okay?" with such terrified honesty that Petra had to answer carefully, so carefully, because sometimes the truth needs to be the right shape to be receivable. She thought about all of that, and she said, "I'll be out of your way." That should have been the end of it. But Gauthier had an audience now. 2 of them. A pair of men about his age who drifted over from the meat counter, who were watching with that particular expression of men who enjoy watching another man flex without getting their hands dirty. "Unbelievable," he said to them, not bothering to lower his voice. "These people wander in looking like they slept in a ditch and act like the rest of us are supposed to accommodate them." One of his friends laughed. A short, derisive sound, like a punctuation mark. Petra's basket was getting heavy. Her feet hurt in the particular deep way that feet hurt after 12 hours on hospital linoleum. She turned to leave. "She's not even going to say anything," Gauthier said. "That's the thing about—" And here he paused, the kind of pause that isn't a hesitation but a choice. Service workers. They're trained to take it. Service workers. It shouldn't have landed the way it did. Petra had been called worse, had been talked past, talked around, talked down to more times than she could catalog. She was a nurse. A good one. She knew her value didn't depend on whether Luc Gauthier could see it. But she was tired. And something about the word trained said the way you'd say it about an animal. Something about it reached into her chest and pulled. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. What she did, and she would think about this later with something between regret and a strange pride, was set her basket down on the floor, very gently, in the middle of the aisle, eggs and bread and Greek yogurt, and she looked at him directly, the way she looked at difficult patients who needed to be seen before they'd listen. "I'm a registered nurse," she said. "I've been at St. Michael's for 6 years. Last night I had 9 patients, one of whom I kept alive by hand until a crash cart arrived. I am 31 years old, and I haven't slept since yesterday morning, and I came in here for bread." She bent to pick up her basket. That was when Gauthier laughed. Not a big laugh. Worse, a small one. Dismissive. The kind of laugh that says, "I heard what you said and I have decided it doesn't matter." "Good for you, sweetheart," he said. And that was when the dog barked. She hadn't even heard them come in. That was what she told people afterward, and it was true. She hadn't heard the automatic doors, hadn't registered footsteps. She'd been so focused on keeping herself steady, on not letting him see anything land, that the world outside the radius of that aisle had gone soft and peripheral. But the bark, a single, sharp, authoritative sound, cut through everything. Heads turned, including Gauthier's. The dog was a Belgian Malinois, and she was enormous. Not in terms of weight, but in terms of presence. Military working dog, you could tell by the vest, by the way she moved. Heel positioned and attentive, reading the room with her amber eyes the way some humans never learn to. Her name, Petra would learn, was stenciled on the vest in faded black letters. RIWAU. The man holding Rado's lead was tall, not dramatically so, but solid in the way of people who have been physically tested so many times their body has stopped bothering to apologize for taking up space. He was in civilian clothes, jeans, a canvas jacket, boots, nothing that announced him. His name was Cormac Shaughnessy, and he was 38 years old, and he had been a JTF-2 operator for 11 years before an IED outside Kandahar did enough damage to his left leg that the military and his leg reached a mutual agreement about the future. He was also Petra's older brother. He had been in the cereal aisle when he heard it. Not the words, not exactly, but the tone. He'd spent enough years in situations where reading tone was survival that he'd developed an instinct that didn't require context. Something was wrong. He'd looked down at Rado, who was already looking back at him with the expression she used when she agreed. They moved toward it. Gauthier saw the dog first, and his posture changed. Just slightly, but Petra caught it. A small tightening around the eyes, a recalibration. Then he saw Cormac. Or rather, he looked at Cormac the way he'd looked at Petra, assessing, dismissing, and found something in the assessment that made him less certain than he'd been a second ago. He didn't know why. He couldn't have said what it was. People who had been around genuine danger sometimes put it off like a frequency, and Gauthier, who had never been in genuine danger, felt it without understanding it. Rado hadn't barked again. She was sitting, perfectly still, watching Gauthier with the calm, absolute attention of an animal that has been trained to wait. Petra. Cormac's voice was quiet. He didn't look at her when he said it. He was looking at Gauthier, not with aggression, not with anything you could easily name. Just looking. "Hey," she said. "You good? You good?" She almost laughed. It came out as something adjacent, a short exhale. "I was just getting eggs." Cormac nodded, slowly, like this was new information he was filing away. He still hadn't moved his gaze from Gauthier. "Your dog," said Gauthier, and his voice had shifted, still confident, but with an edge now, the edge of a man who has decided to go on the offensive because retreating feels worse. "Your dog needs to be on a shorter leash in a public space." Cormac looked at Rado. Rado looked at Cormac. "She's a certified PTSD service animal," he said. "She goes where I go. Everywhere." He let a pause develop, not long, not dramatic. Just enough. That's the law. Gauthier's friend, the one who'd laughed, started to say something. "I'd think carefully," Cormac said, not loudly, "about what comes out next." He said it the way Petra imagined you'd say something similar in very dark rooms to very dangerous people. Not a threat. Not exactly, just a very clear statement about consequences delivered by someone who understood them firsthand. The friends stopped. Gautier looked at Petra, then at Cormac, then at Rideau, who had not moved, who was still sitting with that unnerving attention. "We're done here," Gauthier said, to no one in particular, and then he and his friends moved toward the far end of the aisle, and then they were gone. The cereal aisle was quiet. A small boy in a cart nearby was staring at Rado with his mouth open. Rado stared back. It was unclear who was more interested in the other. Petra looked at her brother. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Getting cereal. At 9 in the morning. Cereal doesn't have office hours." She laughed, properly this time. A real one. The kind that comes out slightly too loud and slightly too long because it's carrying something else with it. Cormac watched her do it. He had the particular stillness of a person who has learned that sometimes you just let things come out. "I'm fine," she said when she'd settled. "I know." It was nothing. "I know," he said again, not arguing, not reassuring, just acknowledging. That had always been the thing about Cormac. He didn't try to fix what didn't need to be fixed. He just showed up. Rado pressed her nose gently against Petra's hand. Petra let her. The story would have ended there probably. Most stories do end at their natural stopping point. The danger passing, the moment resolving, everyone going home. And for a while, Petra thought this one had. She got her eggs. Her bread, the Greek yogurt, was on sale. She went home and she slept for 9 hours straight, and she woke up to 3 texts from her mother asking if she'd eaten, and one from Cormac that just said, "Rideau says hi." She went back to work. She had a patient that week, an older woman named Mrs. Tram, 74, post-bypass, determined to be discharged in time to make her granddaughter's birthday dinner, and absolutely unconcerned with what her cardiologist thought about that timeline. Petra liked her immediately. She spent a lot of time in that room that week, partly clinical necessity and partly because Mrs. Tran told stories about her life in Montreal in the 70s that were extraordinary. And Petra had always been a person who needed stories the way some people need coffee. She wasn't thinking about Gauthier, which is why she was unprepared the following Saturday to see him. He was at a fundraising dinner, the kind of event that happens in hotel ballrooms with round tables and centerpieces and name cards, the kind where the tickets are $400 a plate, and the money goes somewhere deserving, and everyone is there to be seen going somewhere deserving. St. Maul. Michael's held one every year. The chief of medicine went. The board went. A number of surgeons and department heads went. Petra did not usually go. She was not a $400 a plate kind of person, and she was very comfortable with this fact. This year she was there because her colleague and closest friend, Dr. Tour, Anya Breckenridge, infectious disease, which sounds grim, but who was possibly the funniest person Petra had ever met, had purchased a table and then found herself with a spare seat and had used it, in Petra's opinion, somewhat manipulatively, but also correctly. "You need to leave the apartment," Anya had said. "I like my apartment. You name your houseplants. That's not a mental health indicator. You talk to them. They respond better with verbal stimulation. It's in the research." Petra, dress. "Saturday, I'll drive." Petra went. She was at the hotel, in the elevator, when she saw him. Gauthier. He was in a dinner jacket, talking to a man she vaguely recognized from the hospital board, laughing at something. The laugh she recognized, too. Expansive, certain of its own generosity. Her stomach tightened. She told it not to. The elevator opened. She thought, it's a big room. She thought he won't recognize her in a dress, out of scrubs, with her hair down. She thought this doesn't have to be a thing. She found Anya's table, and she sat, and she told herself she was fine, which she mostly was. The evening went on. There was a salad. There was a speech. There was chicken or fish, and Petra got chicken, and it was fine. A cardiologist at her table made a joke about hospital cafeteria food that wasn't very funny, but that she laughed at because she was there, and that was the agreement. She didn't think about Gautier. Then the MC, a cheerful man in his 40s whose energy suggested he had never once in his life experienced a bad day, said, "And now I'm thrilled to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening, someone whose work in trauma response and emergency care has genuinely, meaningfully saved lives in this city. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome. She heard the name. She heard the table next to her go quiet as people set down their forks. She saw Gauthier, 3 tables over, look up, and she watched her brother walk to the podium. Cormac hadn't mentioned the dinner. This, she would think later, was very him, not secretive, just private in that particular way of people who don't lead with their own accomplishments because they don't need to. He'd been invited, she'd learn, because a program he'd helped found. A veteran-focused trauma response initiative run out of 3 hospitals, including St. Michael's, connecting former combat medics with emergency departments for crisis coverage, had been named that year's featured charity. He was good at it. The speaking. He was careful and direct, and he said things like, "I spent 11 years in situations where the difference between life and death was whether someone with the right training was in the right place. And the people in this room save lives every day, and most of them go home to the same quiet as everyone else, and they deserve support that understands what they carry." Rado was with him at the podium. She always was, in public spaces. Not performing anything, just present, head up, scanning. Petra watched Gauthier's face. She watched the moment that he recognized her. When his gaze moved from the podium to the surrounding tables, maybe looking for someone he knew, and found her instead. The brief recalibration. The piece sliding into place, Scrubs, grocery store, the woman he'd called sweetheart. She watched the next moment, when the MC said, "And I should mention, Warrant Officer Shaughnessy's sister, Petra Lemaire, is a critical care nurse here at St. Michael's and is with us tonight." Anya had told them. She'd learn. Anya was going to hear about this later, but in the way you hear about things from people who are actually grateful. She's one of the people this program is designed to support. The room applauded. Petra did not look at Gauthier. She looked at Cormac, at the podium, who found her face in the crowd the way he always had, easily, without drama, and who gave her the small nod that had meant, "Since they were children, we're okay." Rado's ears swiveled. Her amber eyes landed on Petra across the room. Even the dog, Petra thought, was better at this than she was. Afterward at the bar, the dinner winding down, the room loosening into smaller conversations, Gauthier approached her. She saw him coming. She considered her options. She chose to stay. He was different now. Not small. She didn't want him small, didn't think the world worked better that way, but different. The quarter-zip certainty was gone. He looked like a man who had arrived somewhere expecting one kind of room and found another. "Ms. Lemaire," he said. "It's Petra." She kept her voice neutral. She was good at neutral. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him work through it. She'd seen this before. In patients. In families of patients. The moment when a person decides whether to say the true thing or the easier thing. "I was rude to you," he said. "In the store. I was—" He paused, not performing the pause. "I was out of line." Petra looked at him. She thought about the word trained. She thought about Mrs. Tran in room 6 saying, "The thing about getting old is you stop wasting time on people who aren't trying." She thought about Cormac, somewhere behind her, probably eating a bread roll and talking to someone about logistical frameworks for trauma response, because that was who he was. "Yes," she said, "you were." She let it sit. "I'm sorry," he said. She nodded. Not warmly, not coldly. With the particular equanimity of someone who accepts an apology without being required to perform gratitude for it. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He moved away. Anya appeared at her elbow approximately 4 seconds later with a glass of wine and the expression of someone who'd been watching from a safe distance. "Well," Anya said. "Don't," said Petra. "I'm not saying anything." "I know you're not saying anything face. It's very loud." Anya handed her the wine. He looked like he swallowed something uncomfortable. "He did fine," Petra said. And she meant it. Not as absolution. What happened in that grocery store had happened, and a dinner jacket and a moment of clarity didn't undo it. But as an observation, he'd done the thing that was difficult, which most people didn't do. Cormac found her 20 minutes later. Reto found her first, actually, pressed against her leg, tail moving, the way she did when she'd located someone she liked. "How's the bread roll situation?" Petra asked. "Managed to." He looked at her. "You okay? You gave a good speech. Anya told them to put you in the program." "I know. I'm deciding how I feel about it." And she considered. She thought about being tired in a way that doesn't come from one bad night, but from years of absorbing other people's worst moments and then driving home and making dinner and doing it again. She thought about how she'd stood in that grocery aisle and felt, for a moment, genuinely invisible. Not unseen by Gauthier, who was too simple a problem to account for the feeling, but unseen in a larger way, the way that accumulates. And then she thought about Cormac walking into an aisle she hadn't expected him to walk into, and Rideau's amber eyes, finding her in a room full of people, and Anya's particular brand of meddling that had, somehow, put her name in a speech that said, "She matters, and the work matters, and we see it." "I think I feel okay about it," she said. Rideau pressed harder against her leg. Outside the hotel windows, Toronto was doing what it did on October nights. Glittering and indifferent and enormous, the way cities are when you're small inside them. But the room was warm. The bread rolls were apparently decent. And somewhere in the city, Petra thought, a woman named Mrs. Tran was probably at a birthday dinner telling a story that was going on longer than anyone expected, and everyone was leaning in anyway. That was enough. That was, she thought, actually quite a lot. I keep thinking about the moment Petra set her basket down on the floor of that grocery store. Not dramatically, just quietly, carefully, the way you'd set something down when you've decided you're done carrying it at an angle that doesn't serve you. Eggs and bread and Greek yogurt, the most ordinary things. And yet that small gesture said something that her words, however measured, hadn't quite managed to. There's a version of the story where Petra snaps back, where she matches Gauthier's volume, defends herself point by point, makes him look small in front of his friends. I understand the appeal of that version. I've wanted that version for people I love, when they've been diminished by someone who had no right. But what actually happened was something quieter and, I think, more lasting. Petra held her ground without performing it. She told the truth about herself without needing him to validate it. And then she let the rest of it, the apology, the recognition, the room full of people who understood what she did, arrive in its own time. That's what I find myself thinking about. How the consequences of how we treat people don't always arrive immediately. Gautier walked into that hotel ballroom believing on some level that the woman in the grocery store was less than him. And then he had to sit in a room and listen to what she actually was, what she carried, what she gave, what she built, and reckon with the distance between what he'd assumed and what was true. That reckoning is its own kind of accountability. Nobody orchestrated it. Nobody planned it. It just happened, the way things do when you've been careless about the truth for long enough. I think about Cormac, too. He walked into that aisle because something in the tone of the room told him. Someone needed him. He didn't arrive with speeches or threats. He arrived with steadiness, which is the thing that's actually hard to manufacture. You can't fake that kind of calm. It comes from having been genuinely tested and having found, on the other side of it, that you're still standing. That's what Rideau was, too. Not a weapon, not a prop, but a living embodiment of years of work and trust between two beings who had learned to read the world carefully together. What strikes me most, sitting with this story, is how much it costs to keep showing up with integrity when the world gives you every reason not to. Petra went to work the night after. She checked on Mrs. Tran. She laughed at a cardiologist's mediocre joke because she was there, and that was the agreement. That's not passivity. That's a specific kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, the kind that keeps choosing to be decent even when decency goes unwitnessed and unrewarded. I think that's what we're actually being asked to build in ourselves. Not toughness as armor, but something more like clarity, knowing what you're worth without needing someone else to confirm it, knowing when to speak and when to simply set the basket down, having the wisdom to tell the difference between a situation that needs your fire and one that needs your patience. And having the resilience, not the Instagram version, but the quiet, daily, unglamorous version, To keep going after the moments that try to make you feel invisible. Petra went home that Saturday night, and the city was enormous outside the hotel windows, and she felt, I think, okay, not triumphant, just okay, and present, and seen by the people who mattered. That's enough. Most of the time, I think that's actually everything.